Hello 8D and welcome to your lesson on protests against the Berlin Wall. How did the Berliners protest and how effective were they? Can you make sure that you've got that title written in your books and answer the first three questions we will do now. How could West Berliners protest? The free democratic West Berliners. How could the East Berliners protest? Remember, they are the communist Berliners who are under an authoritarian government. And number three, what kind of protest has occurred in these pictures? Make sure you've written those answers down and I will go through it in just a second. Okay, so hopefully for capitalist democratic West Berliners, you've got plenty of ideas. Anything that you have seen in the news for people protesting in this country, it would have been the same for West Berliners. Marching in the streets, with placards, with banners, making speeches, to a certain extent doing graffiti, like these pictures show us happened in West Berlin, besides other forms as well. Whereas in East Berlin, they could not do much protest. That is because the communist government of East Berlin banned any type of criticism of their government. This was the same all over East Germany and the communist states of Eastern Europe and Russia. So Eastern Berliners could not protest. Another thing, however, that East Berliners could do to protest, and that Western Germans could do to protest also, was to give East Berliners money. Sometimes relatives were allowed to visit West Berlin, and when they returned to the East, they would bring money with them and other contraband items, such as West German foods, for example. I cannot impress on you how much the West was kept out of the East. That went right down to the types of food you ate and the clothes that you wore, and obviously in particular the things that you learned at school, etc. Have a look at these two pictures then. Based on what I've just told you and what you've written down, I want you to look at the pictures and write down, why is there a difference in protest between West Berlin with the graffiti on the wall and East Berlin, which does not have anything on the wall? Can you pause the video here, please, teacher, while the students write down why there is a difference between the protests? Okay, so very straightforward. You should have said West Berlin is able to protest with graffiti because it is a free democratic country, whereas East Berlin was not free to protest. People were not free to protest because it was communist and authoritarian. So your next task will be to watch this video. It is from the first anniversary of the building of the wall, and the West Berliners use it as a pertinent day to protest the wall, because it draws international attention anyway, being the anniversary, so it's perfect time for them to protest. I'm going to give you a few questions to answer while you watch the video. What year did this protest happen? Who was protesting? How were they protesting? and how effective was their protest? So please, teacher, can you stop the video here and switch on the other video in YouTube? And students, please can you answer those 4 questions? Okay, 4 questions then, very straightforward, I hope. You see that there was plenty of protesting in the early days, similar to what we've seen, for instance, with the suffragettes. This year was 1962, a year after the Berlin Wall has been built. And the West Berliners are protesting against it. They were marching. Actually, it was a silent march. However, we did see that there was then stone throwing and shouting. Even though the police tried to stop them, they continued. We could say this was not an effective protest, as the Berlin Wall remained where it was. However, it did make the USSR look bad. It made them look brutal, mean, hard, and ruthless. So there are 2 sides to that question. Anyway, that was the protest in the first year. As time went on, protests changed their format. They perhaps went through phases of being more or less passionate, but they did continue nonetheless. We're going to look at escape attempts. Now, the main way East Berliners could protest would be by trying to escape. Unlike West Berliners, they don't have the possibility of marching in the streets or having meetings or making speeches, so they have to protest in very different, more secretive ways, such as smuggling money and food, or they protest in perhaps the ultimate way, which is escaping. After all, the war was meant to keep them in East Germany. We think around 100,000 people tried to escape between 1961 and 1989 from East Berlin to West Berlin. They did this so they then could fly to West Germany and escape communism completely. Most people knew an escape attempt was likely to mean death. Most plans were foiled by the Stasi, the East German secret police, early on, and those who were planning to escape were imprisoned or sometimes killed. Of those who tried, at least 138 people were killed in the death strip between the concrete walls, which split Berlin, where often their body would be left for hours until they were recovered. Another 872 were killed at the first hurdle trying to get over the Eastern Wall. Remember, boys, it's not just a concrete wall. It's 2 concrete walls, between which is barbed wire, nails in the ground, attack dogs, and guard towers full of snipers. So it was incredibly difficult to get through the wall. But it wasn't impossible. This photograph is of an East German soldier called Konrad Schumann, who escaped. He was one of the earliest escapees. He simply jumped over the barbed wire 2 days after the city was divided. That was perhaps the easiest type of escape and the easiest time to escape, arguably, before any of the real infrastructure had begun. There is Konrad Schumann in 2017. Before we look at the escape attempts, I want you just to think about why they kept trying to escape, why East Berliners kept trying to escape even though the war was so deadly. These 2 pictures show you East Berlin on the left-hand side and West Berlin on the right-hand side. You can see these are main streets, but they're incredibly different. The Western Berlin street is full of advertising, full of commerce, full of different types of cars, people going about their business. it is very different to East Berlin, where instantly you can see very grey, dull, uniform apartment blocks and very uniform Soviet cars. Most of them will be likely to be Trabants, which were the common people's car in East Germany and Russia. Unlike West Berlin, you will not see lots of advertising and commerce and people with lots of wealth in East German picture, because they did not have it. Okay, it was a poor place to live compared to the West, and this could drive West Germans, East Germans to go to the West and to try to overcome the barriers in doing so. I can't impress on you the amount of depression and unhappiness that there was in East Germany because of the oppression and the lifestyles they were forced to lead. Okay, and that doesn't go for everyone, but for many East Germans, it was a difficult place to live. So let's see how people escaped. In your books, I want you to split your page in half. There's going to be quite a few slides to look at. On one side, I want you to put a subtitle, The Plan. And on the other side, I want you to say what actually happened. Did it succeed or did it fail? So can you pause the video here, please, teacher, while students spend 30 seconds dividing their page, putting the plan and what actually happened. Okay, so you should have your book divided like this. And let's see. Number one, diverted a train. That's the first plan. Can you write that in your plan column? 4 months after the wall was erected, a young engineer in East Berlin spotted a gap in the barrier. His name was Harry Detteling, and he discovered a disused train track that still ran from East Berlin into West Berlin. Detteling signed up to drive the train on the nearest route, and he plotted what he called the last train to freedom. On December the 5th, 1961, Detteling brought his family and friends on board, drained the air from the train's brakes, and steamed ahead at full throttle towards West Berlin. He sent border guards flying as he smashed through the barrier. Once on the other side, one of the passengers rang West Berlin's police to inform them, "We've just escaped with a train." And East Germany promptly blocked the railway line the next day, and you can see them tearing up the tracks that Detteling used to escape. So in what actually happened, can you write down Harry Detteling escaped using a train? Okay, pause the video here, please, teacher, and students, 30 seconds, write down Harry Detteling escaped using a train. So you should have, for the first one, the plan was diverted a train, and what actually happened, Harry Detteling smashed through the wall on the train and escaped from East Berlin. I'm going to let you guys fill in the table from now on. Your next one is stole a tank. Many of you asked about whether you could steal tanks and escape with them. Well, here we go. East German soldier Wolfgang Engels may have helped to build the wall, but 2 years later, in 1963, he plotted his escape. It wasn't the best plan. On April the 16th, 1963, Engels stole an East German tank and smashed it into the concrete barrier, crying, "I'm getting out of here to the west. Anyone want to come along?" The vehicle, however, failed to break through the wall. Engels got out and tried to climb over it, but he got stuck on the barbed wire, and he was shot twice by East German border guards. Eventually, West Germans who had been drinking in a nearby bar came to his aid and helped him down from the barbed wire. Engels later described to a newspaper how he regained consciousness on the bar counter. He said, "When I turned my head and saw all the Western brands of liquor on the shelf, I knew I had made it." So the tank did not smash through the barrier, but Engels managed to climb over with the help of West Germans. So can you write that briefly into your what actually happened column? Next one, using a convertible, Heinz Meixner drove his Sprite through a barrier without a windscreen on. He did this so it would be low enough to run underneath the posts in Berlin in 1961, just like it shows in the barrier in the photograph. Heinz Meixner did this for love. While working in East Berlin, he fell for a girl called Margarete Terral, but the authorities denied her permission to marry him. Meixner decided to get her and his future mother-in-law out of East Germany. He hired the convertible, removed the windshield, and made it lower on the ground by letting air out of the tyres. And in 1963, with his girlfriend and her mother hiding in the back, he drove the car through one of the most famous checkpoints called Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin. When Meixner reached the inspection point, he ducked and stepped on the gas, escaping to the other side. So can you add that one to your table now, please? A few more then. There's a massive river that runs through Berlin and Germany. And Ingo Bethke became very familiar with this river Elbe, north of Berlin, while serving as an East German border guard. In 1975, he was fed up with East Germany and he went down to the river with a friend and an air mattress. First of all, they had to get through a metal fence, over tripwires, and across a minefield. And eventually they reached the river where they simply paddled the mattress into West Germany. Can you add that one to your table, please? The zip line. I did not really think this was real, but apparently it happened. After Ingo Bethke escaped, his family in East Germany went under investigation. His brother Holger decided to escape himself using a zip line. Holger trained in archery and found a tall building that looked over to West Berlin. In May 1983, he snuck into the attic of the building and he shot a wire cable over the wall using a bow and arrow, Robin Hood style. Ingo was waiting on the other side and he fastened the wire to his car. With a metal pulley, Holger rode the zip line over the wall and joined his brother in West Berlin. Can you add that story to your table, please? The hot air balloon. This was an aircraft mechanic called Peter Strelczyk. He got his inspiration for his escape from an East German TV program on the history of ballooning. Together with his friend Gunther Wetzel, he made the hot air balloon, and he made it big enough to carry him and the families of him and his friend over. They built an engine, and their wives stitched bed sheets for the balloon. This didn't work the first time. However, in 1979, after 30 minutes, they landed in West Germany. So, can we summarise that? Pop that on your table, please. Trapeze artist Horst Klein was banned from performing in East Germany because he had anti-communist beliefs. Instead, he fled to West Germany using a tightrope that he would have used in the circus. He said, "I couldn't live any longer without the smell of the circus in my nostrils." In December 1962, he scaled an electricity pole near Berlin Wall, and dangling high above the patrols, he inched his way across a disused power cable. His hands became numb from the cold and he fell from the rope and broke both of his arms, but he had landed inside West Berlin. And finally, one of the most incredible escapes is the mass tunnel escape. Many tunnels were attempted underneath the Berlin Wall, but it took a lot of ingenuity and planning in order to accomplish this. Several hundred East Germans escaped using a secret tunnel network. In 1962, around a dozen elderly East Germans dug their way out of Berlin using what was later dubbed the Senior Citizens Tunnel. And over 2 nights in 1964, 57 people escaped in another tunnel, which became known as Tunnel 57. It was the largest mass escape in the Berlin Wall's history. It was not the only one, as I said, but it was the most ingenious and largest. And there is a podcast on Tunnel 57 if you care to find out more. So, my final task for you is to answer this question. How did the Berliners protest and how effective were they? I'd like you to put two paragraphs, please. In the first paragraph, can you just say how the Berliners protested? How did West Germans protest? How did East Germans protest? In your second paragraph, give your judgment about how effective they were. Did these protests achieve their goals or not? You could say the West Germans' protests were less effective because the wall remained for 28 years, whereas East Germans who escaped, their protests were 100% effective because they managed to overcome the wall completely. Let's say 5 to 7 minutes to write that answer, and then I've got one more thing for you guys to try if you have time. So I'd like you to graffiti your book, but hold on. I just want you to do it on the end of your lesson notes for this lesson. The graffiti we've seen covering the Berlin Wall was incredibly varied and had lots of different messages, or lots of different ways to back up their message. What I want you to do is, in your book, design graffiti that you would put on the western side of the wall, and then underneath, write down why you have designed it the way you have. You need to make it eye-catching. You need to give it a strong purpose. You need to make it very clear what it's protesting. So if you've got time, have a go at this. If not, I will set this for homework when I see you again next week. Okay, thank you very much, Jerry.